So I kind of gather that at this point in the year, mostly what you have left is prep for nationals and then the actually going to nationals. And what we do here at NCU, we end our tournament season fairly early because we try to keep forensics competition in healthy balance with the other things that the students do. So we don't actually go to AFA or NFA or NPDA Nationals or any of those. Every once in a while we have the ambition to go to NCCFI, but for the most part we do our tournaments, we plan for them, and after the Oregon State Tournament in February, that's pretty much the end of it. Now that doesn't mean that I do not have a lot of experience in the past about prepping for nationals and going in and going big. When I was at Baylor, when I was a sophomore, my teammates won the national debate tournament. They took me along as their research assistant, so I saw how that all played out, what goes into the winning of an NDT. Then when I was an assistant coach at the University of Georgia, we qualified 3 teams to the NDT, and 2 of the 3 were the top 3 seeds. They were the second and third seed. They hit each other in the semis, and one went on to the finals. So we had the second place and third place team at the national debate tournament that year. And then when I was at Arizona State University, I was not directly involved with the people doing individual events that much, but they did ask me to sit in and give them feedback on a lot of their practice sessions, and I did go along and cover their judging. And during the time I was there, they brought home several individual national titles and 1 overall national title from AFA and from NFA. So I have been up close and seen what nationals prep looks like at the very top of the game, and I want to share with you some insights, and I'm going to break them down by event genre, and I'm going to lump, well, okay, before I get to the particular genres, I have a couple of global comments no matter what event you're in. The first is that your nationals prep really has to match your personality and your temperament, and I really direct this comment at any coaches who might be watching this. I assume you probably know already that you have some students where you need to pump them up, you need to light a fire under them, but you have other students where really what you've got to do is you've got to take the pressure off of them, because if you try to pump them up, they'll feel the pressure and they're likely to choke. And you might have a third group of students where they have been struggling and struggling and struggling through the year to continue to find their joy in the activity, and what you've got to do most with them is you have to protect them from burnout. So the first key to prepping for nationals is not just to think, well, it's a big tournament, let's do everything bigger. You've got to sit down and take stock of yourself. Or if you're a coach, you've got to sit down and take stock of your students' needs, and you really have to individualize what are you going to do to get them to nationals with their attitude and their emotional state in the best possible condition so that they have a really good nationals. The second global comment I have is precise is better than big. Precise is better than big. If you were going to box for the World Heavyweight Championship, you would not win if your plan was, I'm just going to go in and hit harder than I usually do. You have to have a battle plan. And something that I've had to warn a lot of students about over the years, even recently when they're just going into the finals of regular season tournament, is don't go in there and try to do it bigger. Don't go in there with your platform and try to just amp up everything and do your delivery bigger and do your volume louder. Because I've had students who do that before. They figure this is a bigger stage, there's more pressure, I need to outshine the other participants, so everything I do to be good, I'll just do more of. And they wind up getting dead last because they look downright grotesque when they do that. Precise is always better than big. You are aiming for a sweet spot. Don't try to figure out qualities that you have and just do them more. The one exception to this is in certain circumstances in debate. Big may actually be good, but I'll talk about that when I get to that particular category. So the first genre, I'm actually going to lump 2 genres together, platform speaking and interp. And the thing that those 2 have in common is you practice them up, you prepare them completely, and then you just go and you perform them. And you can make tweaks in between rounds, but really they are bottled and ready to go. And so the things that I have found work really well prep-wise, both those genres have in common. What you need to do is you need to sit down, and this is a good thing if you're a competitor to get a very good coach to help you with. You need to figure out, why is this event winning? What is the strength of it? How did I qualify this event for nationals? What is the best thing about it? And then what you need to do is you need to make 3 lists, and every once in a while a 4th. The first list is, what are all the qualities that make this a winning piece? If it's a platform, is it winning because of its research? Is it winning because of its verbal imagery? Is it winning because of your delivery? But put whatever its strengths are on that first list. What are the strongest things about this? Then you make a second list. What are the weakest things about this? Then you make a third list. What are the things about this speech, the qualities that are not really its strengths but not really its weaknesses either? And then finally, the fourth list you occasionally make, does this piece, does this performance have some unrealized potential? And I would say about 8 times out of 10, you don't even make it to that fourth list. This is not the time to experiment, and if you experiment, you're really taking some risks, especially if you don't have any tournaments left. But figure out what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and then look at the weaknesses and see, is there a simple fix that you can adopt, that you can hammer out, you can get to where the piece looks even better, and then you can practice it enough times that before you go off to nationals, it is absolutely unconscious. Whatever fix you have made to your performance of that piece, you can do it without having to concentrate on it, and you won't trip up over wanting to do it the old way. Which means this entire process, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, this has to happen in probably about the first week of your prep for nationals. And if you haven't arrived at it by then, if the night before nationals you suddenly realize something you can do to make it a lot better, that's where I would really kind of hang back and say, but the old way that I deliver this piece that I'm very confident with, that may be better just because I'm so confident with it, and it's less likely that if I do it that way, then I'm going to make a mistake in a very high pressure moment. Now the strengths list, you make the strengths list because you think about, is there anything I can do in a very small fashion, in a very gentle and subtle way to make these strengths even better? If my platform has been winning because of its research, is there a way that I can go out and update the research? Can I maybe add the credentials of the authors that I'm citing so the research sounds even more impressive? Now, you don't want to ornament a platform up so much that it becomes just choked with goo, so changes you make should be subtle ones. If there's one scene in your interp piece that's really, really powerful, really emotional, and it's been good at bringing audiences to tears, are there adjustments you could make? Maybe have a lot of people watch it and a lot of people give you feedback. Are there subtle adjustments you could make that could put the tension in that scene, that could tighten it up even more? So, take the strengths, see if there are things you can do just to polish those strengths a little. Take the weaknesses, see if there are adjustments you could make that would address those weaknesses, and then all the qualities about it that are in the middle, I would say leave them alone. Make a list, be aware of what they are, but leave them alone. That list is the reminder that you don't want to rewrite from scratch the piece that got you to nationals, because you're very likely to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. So don't change too much. Okay. So the second category that I want to talk about is I want to talk about debate. And I have more background in team policy than I do in Lincoln Douglas, but I have a little bit of background in Lincoln Douglas. Most of these comments have to do with team policy. I think there are 2 things you need to do. I think, first of all, I think it is a very good idea, and I know that coaches and competitors' opinions vary on this, but I think it's a good idea to take with you to nationals at least one brand new affirmative that you have never run before, that to your knowledge, nobody has ever run before, and that you've had a bunch, well, several practice rounds on to where you're fluent with it and feel confident. Because it is very likely at nationals you'll find yourself in one very important round where you know the other team is ready for you, where you know that they have stacked up their strategy and they are deep on the research, and that's a good moment to go a different direction. You at least want to have that option available. Over the years, when I have had teams that went to nationals and didn't have that, I mean, it was like one of those plot twists that you can see coming in a horror movie. You go to nationals with no new affirmative, and then you wind up under the gun in the round that you need to break to elims, and the other team is just loaded for bear for your affirmative, and you think, if only we had one good new affirmative, we'd be in such a better position. The other thing I think you should do if you're a debater going into nationals is you should gather up every single bit of intelligence that you can about what other affirmatives are out there, and it is a good idea to live in the library. Live in the library and have something in-depth and original to say, not source book, not a file you traded to someone else for. Go back and read through those articles, find out the explanations that the authors put in between the cards, and be very deep on everything. Be thorough and systematic. I mean, ideally you would do this at the beginning of the year, but at the beginning of the year, you have far less access to what people are doing around the country. The teams that go into nationals and tend to do well are the teams that leave nothing to chance. There are no surprises, and really they walk around with a lot of confidence just because they know that they have covered so many eventualities. The other thing that you've got to do going into nationals, it's important that you no longer have arguments. You don't want arguments, you want strategies. Now, strategies are made of arguments, so you need arguments. It's just if all you have are arguments, you're not ready. For just about any affirmative that you know the odds are good you're going to hit, it is very important that you have a strategy. Now, how is a strategy different from an argument? There are a few different ways a strategy is different from an argument. I mean, I would define a strategy as you've thought a couple steps beyond and you've thought, how is this going to come together and result in a win? So one of the ways you can do that is to have arguments that work together to where the arguments that answer one will actually feed the other. The simplest example of this over the years is if you're going to run a disadvantage where the most obvious thing for them to do is to whittle away at the link to the disadvantage by saying our plan is small, it's not likely to make waves, it's not likely to be noticed or perceived, and at the same time, you run significantly topicality. So all their answers to significantly topicality give you little toeholds to say this affirmative is not that small. They're significant because they reallocate a lot of money. Well, you know what? Budget debates tend to get noticed. Another example of arguments that work together, that feed one another. We had an affirmative years ago that had two advantages, and one of the advantages was that the plan would prevent a trade war between the United States and Japan, and the second advantage was because the plan banned United States trade pressure against Japan to open up their rice market. We said that if Japan gave into that pressure, and they were about to, and opened up their rice market, it would destroy the Japanese economy and take down the world economy. And people would answer that first advantage by saying there'll be no trade war because of interdependence. And very often, we would, fairly early in the debate, kick out of the first advantage and say, grant all their arguments that interdependence means there'll be no trade war. All those cards about interdependence feed our argument on the rice market's advantage about how the global economy is interdependent, which is why it fed our explanation of why opening up the rice markets would bring their economy down, and it really fed the argument that if their economy went down, the global economy would go down. So, when you can think about, when they answer this argument, it'll feed this other argument, then what you've got is a good strategy. A second example of a good strategy, and something we used to do a lot going into nationals, is take an argument that, for particular affirmatives, take an argument that most affirmatives are very, very confident they'll be able to answer, and just go research it to death. Get very, very good evidence. Do a number of practice speeches on it and get to where you're very fluent on it, because very often teams will have beaten that argument back at the first couple of tournaments of the year, and they'll be very, very cocky. And sometimes word will have spread that they're ready for this argument, don't even bother running it. And what the team faced earlier was someone's first impression, someone's first rough cut, how they put the argument together. But when they come up against your version that's a lot more polished and researched in a lot more depth, and you come and very often you put that argument out in the first negative and they think, oh, we've heard this before, they're putting it out to suck our time, and then you surprise them in the 2NC by going very in-depth and by having a lot of very good evidence on it. That's the kind of thing that can help you win the perception battle. It can first of all rattle them, because this is not the script that they're used to following. And if you have a judge who's in the know, who in her own mind is thinking, this is a strategy that the affirmative ought to be able to beat, and then the judge hears your evidence and says, wow, maybe not. That's the kind of novelty, that's the kind of moment of upended expectations where you really kind of have the psychological momentum in the mind of the judge. So, one way to strategize is to think it through to where one set of arguments feeds another argument that you're trying to make. Another is to take an argument that they think they're ready for and go so deep on it, be so ready for it, that you can go beyond what they've seen in the past with people deploying these arguments. The third and final thing I'll give you as an example of a strategy is go weird. Just go weird. It won't work for parent judges necessarily, although you never know. You might have a parent judge who is downright amused, especially if you could strike the right demeanor of, we understand this argument may surprise you a little bit, but this is part of the activity, and the burden is on our opponents to justify their answers and not simply to say, this is a silly argument. I can give you an example years ago. I admit we didn't go through with this, but it would have been an example of going weird. Dartmouth, years ago, was running an affirmative that had to do with satellite imagery. And we had had a hard time all year getting together a strategy for what to do with this satellite imagery affirmative. And so what we talked about doing going into nationals was we were just going to go to the Flat Earth Society, and we were going to cut a lot of evidence that the Earth is flat, that everything that we've been told is a space program, the moon landing, everything else, it's just a conspiracy. It's just governments trying to deceive their people. And we were going to go in and see if Dartmouth, with no advance notice, could defend the idea that the Earth was round when we had done all the research to be able to answer all those arguments. Because I'll tell you, the Flat Earth Society, they think through all the reasons you might give why the Earth is round. You know, ships disappear over the horizon. They've got 50 answers to that. And if, just for one debate, we could catch them and make them think on their feet and be deeper than them on a weird argument. If you have an affirmative that is just stubborn and you haven't been able to think of any other angle that'll work, then maybe what you might want to do, and there's a certain amount of fun involved in this, is go weird. I don't recommend it all the time, and you might find yourself in a debate where that's your best argument, but the judge you have absolutely will not tolerate it, and that can be kind of disappointing. But it's an option. The last category of events is limited prep events, and I really have only a couple of bits of advice if you're going to nationals in a limited prep event. The first thing is that you want to do a lot of practice, obviously. You want to practice several times a week with really good feedback. I would say that having a lot of practices, if you have little feedback or no feedback at all, if it's just going to be the other people in your club, or if it's just going to be whatever parent happens to be around, someone who doesn't have a lot of background in the activity, I would say that you don't need to do that many of those practices. You need to reach out to everybody around you who really knows your event, whether it's extemp, impromptu, apologetics, whatever it would happen to be. Find people who can really get into the finer points and really, really polish you up and do as many of those practice rounds as you can. Now, what's important is if you are experiencing a little bit of burnout, if you're getting mentally tired, then give yourself a break. Take several days to a full week before nationals and just lay off. But, and maybe get in a couple of practice speeches on the day before you leave for the tournament. But, as I've seen happen a few times over the years, if you're loving it, if you're really excited about nationals and you're finding that you're really proud of the skills that you've developed, then still be careful, because that can run its course, and you don't want it to run its course before you get to nationals. But that's where you can get in a lot of solid practice and really cement a lot of the gains that you've made recently. All right, so take stock of where you are temperamentally, go precise rather than going big, evaluate subtle changes you can make to make your pieces better, live in the library if you're a debater and leave nothing to chance. Think strategy, not argument. Go into nationals with at least one new affirmative. I really think that's a good idea. And if you're going to do limited prep events at nationals, get a measured amount of practice, not so much that you get burned out, and make sure that the practice is of very high quality. Something that John Wooden, the legendary coach at UCLA, used to say is, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Practicing just for the sake of practicing when you're not getting the good feedback to improve is just going through the motions. That's what I have to offer, and congratulations on qualifying for nationals, and good luck to you.